So you've been nursing for 7 years now. Type 1 diabetes basically became your entire career.
I was diagnosed when I was 10 years old, and things have changed since then. When they taught you to give shots, they would bring in an orange. So it was like this way back in the day. You'd bring in an orange, and everyone would, learn how to give shots on that.
I kind of wish I got to practice on an orange, I'll be honest, because it is like what you just said it is horrifying for a parent to do it, and for even the kid, obviously.
Yeah. I remember when I delivered my last baby, my carb ratio went down to 1-to-1.
That sounds insane to me.
It does. I literally had to give 30 units, to be able to have, a banana. That's crazy.
Hey Palmr fam, I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Nick.
And welcome back to another episode of The Urgent Lows, where we talk about lifestyle and type 1 diabetes.
Here we believe in embracing self-care through life's challenges. We are back with another amazing episode. We have Katie. And for everybody who watched Amanda's episode, this is her best friend that she raved about. And so we had to get her on right away. And so she's here. So Katie, welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
Yay.
Hey.
For today's episode, we do have a quick disclaimer. Katie is an employee of Insulet Corporation, makers of Omnipod. The views expressed by Katie are her own. The Urgent Lows at Palmr is not affiliate with Insulet.
Okay, so let's get started. Katie, we have heard so much about you from Amanda. So we would love to, start from the beginning. So let's start with your diagnosis story.
Okay. So I was diagnosed, trying to think of how much math I want to give you here, but I was diagnosed when I was 10 years old. So definitely as a child, and things have changed since then. We'll say it's been at least, 20 something years, and it was a whole different world. So when I was diagnosed, I remember being in the doctor's office. They found it in the doctor's office, and then I went to the hospital. But I remember being in the doctor's office, and I had read the Babysitter Club books. I don't know if anyone has ever read that series or if it's even still relevant today, but in the Babysitter's Club books, there's this girl named Stacy. She's one of the babysitters, and she has diabetes. And I just remember going, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to give shots, and I'm not going to be able to have sugar. And I was so upset. And that was the biggest thing that I knew at the time, because I was 10. And that was the biggest thing that popped into my head. Mm-hmm. Obviously, fast forward, we do the hospital, we do all the education. And to this day, 20-something years later, I still remember my educator's name. I remember that entire process. So different back then. So back then, we didn't have Lantus. There was very few, there's only one pump on the market. You definitely didn't start that right away. Mm-hmm. And so back then, you started with NPH and R, which lucky for you guys have never had to experience that with your kiddos, but it is a very strict schedule of you have to eat, breakfast, lunch, dinner, 3 snacks a day. You have to eat a certain amount of carbs. So it was very rigid, very regimented. When they taught you to give shots, they would bring in an orange. So it was this way back in the day. You'd bring in an orange, and everyone would, learn how to give shots on that, which I do remember going home and my mom going to give me the first shot, which my mom, when she was learning, bless her heart, in the hospital, she's shaking next to this orange. So the minute we got home, she went to go give me the first one, and I went running. I was like, absolutely not. This is not happening.
Yeah, I feel like that would be traumatizing on the orange.
I'm like, oh my gosh, this poor orange.
But I kind of wish I got to practice on an orange, I'll be honest, because it is what you just said it is horrifying for a parent to do it, and for even the kid, obviously. Yeah. But that, especially yes, you kind of did in the hospital a few times, and then you go home and it's that first time you're going to do it, and you're like, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah.
Well, I'm more impressed that they found it at the doctor's office and not the hospital. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I feel like everyone's stories is they catch it so late.
Yeah, and it's true. It can vary from person to person. Obviously, I work for Insulet now as a pediatric account manager, so I still work with a lot of kids newly diagnosed. And previously, I worked in a clinic, with kids, so seeing it from the beginning all the way through. But my parents found it because I was losing a lot of weight, and I was a very active kid. I did gymnastics, lots of activities, and that's at first what they associated with. And then I started getting really tired all the time. and I was super hungry. So constantly hungry, but my mom saw I was still losing weight. And so it was just like the traditional signs that we all know that you look for now, right? Like super hungry, super thirsty, like all of those things. I don't know if she necessarily recognized that at the moment, but she did recognize that something was wrong, and she took me to the doctor. And they picked up on the signs, of course.
Okay.
And that's kind of how it started.
Yeah.
They did a glucose check at the office, and it was crazy high. So, we went from there to the hospital.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a different story. It wasn't that I was, airlifted right away, type of thing. But, and it's a different, depending on each person. I have kids that, I get to work with that they did catch it in the office, like that they caught it early. And then I have other ones that, they spent weeks in ICU. So it just kind of depends. It's definitely a different story for each person.
Yeah. Well, I know at least for Parker, they kept, he was sick and it was over the weekend, but Nick kept calling the doctor, the after hours, and they're like, oh, it sounds like he has the flu. Just give him medicine and have him rest and have him sleep. And it was only because Nick mentioned, I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but he's been peeing a lot more than usual. And then that is what triggered them to be like, you need to take him right away to the emergency room. So because of that, thank goodness. But I know, we've heard so many stories of the doctors being like, oh no, they have the flu, it's fine. They have a stomach virus, it's good. And then it ends up being type 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's super scary.
Yeah. So you obviously went into a career of being a nurse. What made you want to be a nurse?
So I always knew that my end goal was working with kids with diabetes. Nursing was a second career for me. When I was pregnant with my oldest son, he's 12 now, I had worked with a diabetes educator at the time because pregnancy and diabetes is a whole different ballgame. And she was like, man, you should do this. You should go back and do this, which is really funny because she and I are friends now. So years and years and years later, it's a full circle. But at that moment, when I went into nursing school, I knew this was my end game. I've always loved working with kids, but, diabetes was definitely where my passion is. Obviously, living with type 1, I knew that this is a community that I care deeply about. And one way or another, that was how I was going to get in there. I was very lucky because going to nursing school, I, obviously had an amazing support system. I got to meet Amanda. That was wonderful. She and I, started our first nursing jobs together afterwards, which was amazing. And it was a really good transition into, working with kids with diabetes.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about pregnancy and type 1 diabetes, because yesterday we were around some moms who have type 1 that have had kids, and where the doctors or whatever it may be kind of want to push their game plan on how you should handle type 1 diabetes and pregnancy. And they're like, no, you have to advocate for yourself because you're the one that knows your body. So tell us a little bit about that.
So it's very true. I always say diabetes with pregnancy, especially type 1, is its own battle. It's kind of like a second full-time job, when you're pregnant. Pregnancy and diabetes is just definitely its own ballgame. So it's constantly being aware of what the blood sugars are and aware of what the changes that happen. So your first trimester, so much is happening, right? And then the second trimester, that's where the people who don't have diabetes, that's where they start testing for gestational, because that's when you've got all the placental hormones that naturally raise blood sugar.
Okay.
So when you already don't make insulin and then you add all of that in, then you see these huge changes in your insulin needs. Okay. So I remember when I delivered my last baby, it was my carb ratio went down to 1-to-1.
Wow.
So for 30 grams of carbs, I needed 30 units of insulin. Never in my life have I needed any amount of insulin like that.
Yeah.
But when you're pregnant, it changes because you have all of these extra hormones, all of these extra things happening, and it just completely changes. And the insane part is the minute you deliver the baby and you deliver the placenta, which carried all those hormones, it goes right back to what it was. And it goes back to your
That's what we heard
norm.
yesterday, that they drop low. And I was like, wow, that's just... Yeah.
I can't even get my head around the 1-to-1 ratio. That sounds insane to me.
It does. Even when I say it now, and I work in diabetes, I've lived this 3 times. I have 3 children. And every time I say it, I'm like, I literally had to give 30 units, to be able to have a banana. That's crazy,
Wow.
But it's very true. That's what happens.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah, that is crazy. And I even just think about like my daughter one day when she'll eventually have kids, but I mean, God, we're so far out from that. Like, knock on wood, hopefully like 15 plus years or whatever. But like, I'm sure things will change in technology and when that time comes. But man, it really is, it's scary. And, obviously it's so happy to hear that you had 3 healthy pregnancies. And because we've heard from Elizabeth from Touched by Type 1 that for a very long time, they would just tell women, you can't have kids. And there's very few people that were saying, no, it's fine.
Yeah.
Like, make it work, right?
It's very
because
true.
it is. And it's scary because you don't want to ever have to tell a woman, oh, you can't have kids or anything like that, who want to that. And so the fact that there is so many moms who do it, go through it, they have a healthy baby, it's amazing. And your story's just another one of those, so it's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, we've heard stories of like back in the day getting diagnosed, their kids getting diagnosed, and the doctors are just like, the parent are like, is my kid going to survive? And they're like, we're trying everything we can do. And it's like, like thinking that like life or death situation and just how far we've come along now with all the technology and everything we have. But like, I can't imagine as a parent, like getting that, like, oh, we're trying everything we can, but prepare yourself for the worst. It's just horrible.
And it's very true. I remember when I was diagnosed, at the time they were saying there'll be a cure in 10 years,
Yeah.
And believe me, like the minute there is a cure, I would happily get another job. I will stand hand in hand, with every single person in that line. I do think it's coming. I think that eventually we will have one. But I just remember hearing that from every person I talked to. In 10 years, we're going to have it. I think now there's less promises about like in this amount of time, right? Mm-hmm. But the technology has evolved so much, which has been amazing. I do remember with my last baby, I was still working bedside. So right after I had her was actually when I started working in diabetes in a clinic. But I was still working bedside, and I had a new diagnosis during that time. So my last few shifts at the hospital, this little girl, and her just connecting with the mom and her mom being like, you're so pregnant. Like she can still have babies. I'm like, yeah, she can still have babies. This doesn't change that. If she wants kids, that's still there. Like that is still an option.
Yeah.
And it's crazy, those stories. Like I would have, moms saying like, she can still have ice cream. Yes. Like ice cream, we're never going to hopefully never take that away from a kid's life. Unless of course, like they're definitely allergic, then don't have ice cream.
Yeah.
But, it's these things that they're able to see that like, yes, it is a reality to be able to have children if you're wanting to do that. Like our technology, like within the world has come so far that yes, it's not quite the cure yet, but we have made like leaps and bounds as far as technology goes.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about before kids and everything and like dating with type 1 diabetes and like college, going to school with type 1 diabetes. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So again, I will have to shout out like my husband, my parents, all the people that have ever dealt with me ever. I mean, Amanda, like love her, but because it's when you have diabetes and there are people in your life that are big parts of your life, you have to share that.
Yeah.
And I will say growing up, my mom was wonderful. Same with my dad about like, it doesn't change what you want to do. Like if you want to do something, we're going to find a way. I remember my mom, we had this field trip when I was in 6th grade. We would go camping for like 2 days or something. And we got to do all of these different science things while we were there. And they told her I couldn't go unless she went. And I remember her going to the school saying, you can't tell her she can't go. And granted, she went. Like my mother is wonderful. She went. But I remember her saying, you can't tell her she can't go to a field trip. Like, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. And so she was a big proponent of, like, getting me involved in different organizations. So that way, from a young child, I was speaking about, type 1 advocacy and different things. And then I won't say I was the perfect child by any means. Like, we all have had, like, our moments of burnout. And but she was a good support system through that. And, going into dating, you kind of learn. We actually talk about this sometimes at diabetes camp. I work with Florida Diabetes Camp, and especially in the older groups, we kind of have education sessions where the kids can ask whatever they want. Mm-hmm. And there's doctors and nurses and educators and all of these people that can answer these questions. But dating comes up a lot.
Yeah.
Especially as they get older, right? Like these are questions that kids rightfully should have. And how important it is to feel comfortable telling whoever you are dating, hey, I have diabetes. Like if I'm acting strange for whatever reason, if you hear this beeping coming from my phone, like however you want to, put it, but it's important that they know.
Yeah.
And it's also important that if you don't feel comfortable telling that person, maybe that's not the person you want to be dating, right?
Yeah.
And so obviously now as an adult, it's very easy to have those conversations and say, especially working in diabetes, right? Like, hey, like this is a part of me. But sometimes for our kids, it is a little bit different. Like they have to get comfortable having these conversations and say, hey, you know what? Like diabetes is a part of my life. The great thing is it's not my whole life. It's just a part of it.
Yeah.
But I want you to be aware of it.
Yeah. So how long after your diagnosis did you like get on like equipment and everything? And like, did you share your numbers with your mom? Like, how did that go about?
Yeah, so that's a great question, especially because things have changed. So the very first time I had a CGM was when I was pregnant. That was the very first time I got it. So that was, 12, 13 years ago at this point. Because it wasn't available back then.
Yeah.
So when we look, 20 plus years ago, you didn't have all of these available CGMs that you could just pop on their arm and, we're good to go. So I actually went from MPH and R, and like I said, my mom was a great advocate for me, to an insulin pump. So most kids at that time would have to go to Lantus and then transition to the full multiple daily injections. My mom was my biggest advocate. And so I was able to go, especially because of how active I was, straight to a pump. But it was so different then.
Yeah.
So going to a pump, we didn't have continuous glucose monitors. So it was going to a pump, and it was weeks of education to get a pump. So it was, these carb counting classes, and then your parents had to wear the pump. Each one of them had to wear the pump with saline. Obviously, we didn't give them insulin. We do like them, but with saline. And so they would have to wear that before you could even put it on. So weeks of education. Like it's come so far when I train patients now, it's really nice because sometimes we get to train them a week after diagnosis. Like they get to start this life without having to give shots multiple times a day. But back then, that's not how it was. So I definitely transitioned to a pump pretty quick, and then was very happy to get a continuous glucose monitor. But I do remember going home once. My mom lives in Arizona. That's where I grew up. And being like, hey, Mom, I need you to follow my Dexcom for the week. And she was like, I was so happy to give that back by the end. Like, take it off. I never want to see it again. Like, all of the anxiety that comes back.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see where it's evolved and to kind of hear different sides of it.
I know. We touch on this a lot. Like, especially me coming as like a stepmom into this situation. Like, pretty early on, once like we started living together, I got access to the app and everything like that. And then my biggest fear was that Nick was going to sleep through a low alarm at night. Even though he was doing it at the time 6 years by himself without me in the picture. But I'm like, this is going to be the time that he sleeps through it. So I would just at night, like he would go to sleep, everybody would be sleeping, and I would just be wide awake and waiting for that alarm to go off. And at those beginning stages, we had like both of our phones with the alarms on, and then we had a loaner phone too. So we had all these noises happening if anything happened, and then we have 2 kids with it. So God forbid it's both alarms going on at the same time, but it was startling. But I ended up getting the shingles after 3 months because I wasn't sleeping. I was so stressed out. So I was 31 and got shingles because of the immense stress that I was putting on myself with these numbers and like, he's going to sleep through this and all this stuff. And I had this like mentality of the numbers have to be perfect. Like when they're with us, it has to be perfect. Like we have access to this app. Like we know better. It should be perfect. And then I quickly realized that there is no perfect in type 1 diabetes. And just even realizing this was like a big game changer in our relationship because we have the kids 50% of the time. So when they wouldn't be with us, we would still have all the alarms on. But we quickly realized like technically there's really nothing that like Nick can do. You know what I mean? They're not at his household. They're with their mother. Like, and it's during her time. Like there's nothing that he can do as the father. So we were just like driving ourselves crazy with these alarms going off with like us basically like handcuffed. There's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can really say. So we had to take the notifications off once they leave and they go to their week with their mom because it was the only saving grace that we had. Like, I literally feel like that was a therapist gave us that advice, and I swear that saved our marriage, because we were going down this downward spiral that was just so bad, because then like the alarms would be going off, we couldn't do anything, then we would start arguing with each other, and then it's just like, it was a horrible cycle we were in. So I really thank that therapist for like being realistic. But, you know, we talk about like, was it better back in the day when there wasn't these apps that you could monitor it 24/7? But like, you know, the technology is so amazing. Like, we're so lucky to have it. But I definitely think it's a win-win, in which I feel like it's the same with like having a cell phone and social media and all that. But yeah.
But even yesterday when we were with everybody with Touched by Type 1, that we were having a debate of what is worse, having type 1 or being the caregiver.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because pretty much everyone who had type 1 said, oh, it's so much easier having it than being the caregiver, with the anxiety and what they've seen, what their like parents have gone through. It was crazy to like hear that from people.
I know, like we were really there was one other mom that was there. And besides that, we were like the only caregivers and parents there. And like hearing these women that have type 1 diabetes that have had it for years say, oh yeah, we can't imagine being caregivers of little kids with type 1. Like that would be so difficult. And then ×2 in our case.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I agree. I think it's crazy. And it's such a different, unless you live it, like you don't realize all of the other pieces that go into it.
Like Nick could never prepare me enough for what life with type 1 diabetes. Like we would go on dates and he would talk about it. Like obviously like advocate like, hey, I have 2 kids with type 1 diabetes. And I swear every date we would go on, he's like, are you sure you want to date me? Like, are you sure? Like he gave me so many outs and I'm like, it's fine. And then I would go home after the day and like Google it. And there's again, so much that Google can tell you, but it took me living there and then like seeing how I react to it. Cause you know, we're very different people. So like, I'm obviously very anxiety driven. So that app and having access to it just literally drove me crazy. Cause I'm like, we have an app and it's expected to be perfect. You know what I mean? So it's definitely a battle.
I remember when I worked in a clinic and we would first put patients on a CGM and we would say, this is a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
Because you're going to see what's happening all the time. But you have to remember that just because you can see it doesn't mean you can do something in that exact moment, right? Like when it's brand new and all of that, because it's great that you can see it. But the curse is that you can also see it, right? Like it goes both ways.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Florida Diabetes Camp. Tell us about that, your experience. And I know everybody I've talked to just raves about it. So tell us about it, why it's so amazing.
Okay, so background, I have to give you this, is, again, I talked about my mom growing up, like made sure that I always had all these opportunities.
Did your mom have like any experience with type 1? She like sounds like this amazing advocate.
No, she didn't. So nobody else in my family has type 1.
Okay.
And she just, I don't know, kind of took it and ran with it. My mom was terrified of needles. So I mean, like, she really did this 180 and, you know, it's your kid, right?
Yeah.
And so growing up, from the age of 10, I started going to camp. And so that was the biggest thing for me because back then, you know, not everyone had, you know, my school that I went to, there was one other child with type 1 diabetes. And that was it. It was a big school. It was a K-8 school. Like nobody else had it. And so going to camp, I was in a cabin with a bunch of other 10-year-olds that had diabetes too. Some of them diagnosed like, you know, shortly after me or right around the same time. And it was amazing to have that. Like you didn't feel so alone. And I know now, like, you know, there are more groups, which is amazing. I love that. And there are more ways for kids to connect with other kids of type 1. But diabetes camp is its own special thing. So when you go to diabetes camp, and I know Amanda talked a little bit about Boggy Creek, and I love Camp Boggy Creek as well, but Florida Diabetes Camp is different in the aspect of the abnormal is not having diabetes. Like everyone there has diabetes. So even most of the counselors, a lot of the counselors have diabetes, they have type 1, and every kid in that cabin that is there with them, they also have type 1. So I go every year for at least 1 week, and it's amazing to see these kids. They come back year after year, and you'll even have the ones that are brand new. And I jokingly tell kids sometimes when I'm doing trainings, I'll say, have you looked at camp? Like, have you looked at this? Like, this is great, especially if they're newer diagnosis. And every now and again, I'll have a kid that's a little bit on the fence about it, and I'll say, listen, if you go to camp and you don't love it, you can find me and you can punch me. And I haven't been punched yet. And I'm a little bit short, but I can take it if I need to. But I haven't been punched yet.
Yeah.
Like, because they get there and it's so magical. Like, they spend so much time down at the lake, so many lake activities, land Olympics, so much to do. They have so much fun. They never want to leave at the end. It is just an amazing thing. The director, Dr. Paul, does a great job making sure that these kids are safe. It's probably one of the safest places they can be. There are multiple endocrinologists, pediatric endocrinologists. There are, diabetes educators, counselors with diabetes. Like, these kids are probably the safest ever. My brother did tell me recently that he loved when I went to camp because he would get all the sugary cereals and all the things that I would have had to give tons of insulin for.
Yeah.
So my mom would stock the pantry with all of his favorite things while I was gone. So, but I do hear parents every now and again go, yeah, like, since they're at camp, we're going to go have a weekend, like, at the beach. We're going to go, And so it's a good reprieve for both the parents and the kids because you know that they're safe, right? Like, they are with probably the best medical people that they could be with, right? Mm-hmm. And you know that they're safe.
So then talk to me a little bit about, is this the camp where like you can't get access to your kids' numbers anymore because of like the service and all that, or?
Yes. So we actually at Florida Diabetes Camp will, and again, because it's the best thing for the parents and the kids.
Yes.
We turn off the data. So when the kids come, one of the first things we do during check-in is they turn off the data onto the phone, and then we put tape so that way the kids can't like look at it and like open the FaceTime and turn it back on. And then their phones they still have with them, especially if Dexcom or Omnipod is controlled by their phone, any of those. But what they do is the counselors hold them. So it's with them, near them at all times, of course. But the counselors hold them. So they are disconnected from social media. They are disconnected from having those texts from mom and dad saying, hey, are you okay? Because you have multiple counselors that are with them at all times, making sure that they are.
Oh my gosh, I love that. It sounds like such a vacation.
So you've been nursing for 7 years now. Tell us about how type 1 diabetes basically became your entire career.
Yeah. So I started in peds, bedside right out of nursing school, which was amazing. And then COVID happened, right? Like COVID was a lot for all of us. So while I was on maternity leave, we went on lockdown. And coming back bedside with a newborn at home, I had always been looking to eventually transition into diabetes, and a position opened up at our local pediatric hospital in their endocrine center. And so I applied and kind of made that transition over there. And I loved it over there. I loved working there. I got to work with some of the most amazing endocrinologists. I worked with a wonderful team of educators. We, got to see them from the beginning of diagnosis. And, doing that new onset teach, which Amanda talked a lot about, but doing that from the beginning, following up with them, kind of walking them through the story. And then a lot of times the pump teach, right? So when they get to the point where they're starting their very first AID system, which is huge, that automated insulin delivery system. And I realized pretty early on that was my favorite part. Like, I love doing that pump teach and like those kids having that aha moment of like, I don't have to give a shot for snacks. I don't have to give a shot every time I have a meal. Like those aha moments where these kids were like, that was it? That was the only poke for the next few days? Yeah. Yep, like that's it, right? So that was the thing that I loved the most. Like I loved connecting with these kids. And then I love that moment of like that life-changing, we now don't have to give these shots. Mm-hmm. And that was amazing. So eventually, different positions popped up, and I worked for a different pump company at one point. And now working with Insulet, it's amazing. When this job was posted for, pediatrics, I was like, you know what? That's what I love. Like, I love these kids. Like, I love being able to start from the beginning, and like being able to see those moments with them is huge. And I, in particular, like love that not everyone's the same, right? Like we get to meet them where they're at. And that in itself is wonderful, especially with, whether they're 4 or 14, or I sometimes get kids that are in college that still see their pediatric endocrinologist, which is amazing, but being able to meet them where they're at, because life is different, whether we're 4 or 14. And as you mentioned, diabetes is not perfection.
Yeah.
The minute we figure it out, something changes, right? Like it's about to be summer. Like summer is going to let out and now we don't have school every day and things change. So it's being able to kind of coach and transition through that, especially because I've personally lived it so many times.
Yeah. I do have a question, and this may be a little bit of a dumb question, but I don't know the answer to it. In regards to a kid getting diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, how then do they choose what pump to be on? Is it up to the patient and their parents, or is it up to their insurance? Like, how does that all work?
I think that's a great question. I don't think there are dumb questions. Like, I very much believe that all questions are valid. It depends on, honestly, the clinic. So there's, you'll never hear me say anything bad about another company. I very firmly believe that having type 1 diabetes, that if one company does one thing, it pushes all of the others to do more, and we all rise up together. But what happens when they are looking to choose a pump, and it depends on the clinic, but a lot of times they're presented with all the information. What I will say is that specifically with Omnipod, it goes through pharmacy benefit. So there's no 6-month wait, any of that. So we are seeing, a lot of times kids are able to start pump therapy a lot quicker, whereas before it did take 6 months. So they get to present the different options. A lot of times the clinic will talk to them about the different choices that are out there. There are many choices for kids when they're looking at pumps. And then they get to kind of choose with their doctor what's the best selection for them.
Okay.
Yeah, and I love what you said and I remember having this conversation with a friend recently where all of the pump manufacturers are pushing each other to become the best. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a great thing because they all offer something slightly different. And so it really does come down to your kind of personal preference. And they all kind of have a pros and cons at the end of the day. Obviously, Omnipod is known to be tubeless. That is their big selling point. Mm-hmm. My son started on Omnipod. It was fantastic. It had its downfalls too. Mm-hmm. Eventually we moved over to Tandem because at the time it didn't have the, I don't know what Omnipod calls it, but the smart IQ. And that was a game changer. But then sure enough, Omnipod rolled that out shortly afterwards. And they're all kind of pushing each other. And we've talked to a few other pump manufacturers and some new ones that are coming out and sharing some of this new technology and new things that they're adding to it. And I'm like, that's amazing. Everybody's going to start doing the same thing and pushing and adding new features, and the technology is just going to get better. Well, there's not going to be a cure tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Every time the pump gets better, that is a win for this community. And that's something to at least celebrate right now, because I've even seen how much better my kids' blood sugars got as soon as that smart technology came out, where it's not just doing your every day, it's the same basal rate, but being able to adjust it up and down based off of what their numbers are.
Yeah. And I think that's a huge call out, Nick. I think that is dead on. It pushes everyone to do better. And the nice thing is now is, you're right, for a while, Omnipod didn't have an automated system, and now there is, right? So the great thing is all AID systems work. They work differently. I can argue all day about algorithms and how this one works and how this one works, and honestly, I love doing that. But I think it is wonderful that we are at the point that no matter what, kids have the option of AID.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the ADA standards of care actually suggest that it's the preferred method of insulin delivery now, which is amazing. It's come so far from the NPH and R with that orange, right? It's come so far.
Yeah. Well, even hearing stories of that Nick has told me of when Parker got first diagnosed, how long was it? 6 months? It was a 6 months wait that he had. And then when Evie ended up getting diagnosed years later, they got extra equipment from Parker, so they put it on her right away. And that process was quicker anyways than Parker's.
She had equipment in a week.
But I can't even imagine, I remember the first question I had for Nick, I was like, did you sleep that first night when he came home? Because it's okay, you're in the hospital, great, you're getting all this information, but you're still in the hospital, right? You have nurses taking care of you. And then you go home and you're not technically a nurse, but you have to do all these things. And knowing how my brain works, I'm I wouldn't have slept if there was not an app that I could see the numbers. And even the other day, kind of, now we can laugh about it, but one night, when was it Dexcom or somebody had an outage?
Oh, yeah. Dexcom had an outage, I don't know, it was a month ago.
And we weren't getting any numbers, and it was right before bedtime. And I'm are you serious? as you can probably tell, like sleep is very important to me, and when I don't have it, I go crazy. But
I'm with you.
so then I'm like, what do we do? Like, now it's like we don't have the numbers, and Nick is like, oh, I'll put like 30-minute like timers on my phone to like wake up. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, it does make sense, but it's like, that's not going to be a good night. So we ended up like taking the kids' phones because, long story short, we're not even living in our house right now because it's under renovation. So we are at my parents' house, and we're all very tight, quaint on top of each other. So the kids were close enough that we could have their phones in the room that we're staying in because they're just right outside the wall, and it would still connect. So we were able to do it like that. But I was thinking, like, if we were actually in our house, that wouldn't have worked. So
No, it wouldn't have. But yeah, I mean, that's how you had to do it back in the day.
Yeah.
But also to answer your question, because yes, you're scared, but I think I was more scared about trying to give the shots and figure that stuff out than worry about them going low in the middle of the night. I mean, yes, we would wake up and all that. But again, because you didn't have the data, the alarms, it wasn't. And again, I don't think you even knew the consequences of that yet and how damaging, right? That first week, you're so focused on the shots and all that, that you don't even know and understand, like, oh, they might go low in the middle of the night. And possibly they have gone low at times. And you just didn't even know, honestly. But your body does, naturally produce stuff to make your blood sugar go up over time. So as long as you aren't going crazy with the insulin, like, a lot of times you're okay. It's just, I mean, obviously not great if you go too low, but you kind of just didn't know. So tell us about a moment when you're in career, probably more on the nursing side, but it could be anything, that has really kind of stood out to you of a moment that you'll never forget.
we asked Amanda this one, and it made us cry. So all these stories.
Amanda makes everyone cry.
Yeah.
So there's tons of stories, I feel like. But we were talking a little bit about, right before I delivered my last baby, I had this family in the hospital and, that new diagnosis stage and, me being able to be their nurse, incredibly pregnant, waddling in and out of their room, but being able to connect with that mom, like it's life-changing, as you guys know. Like in that moment, you're thinking of how is our life changing? All of these things, all of these thoughts and dreams that you have for your kids and how you're going to incorporate this into it. And so when I came back from maternity leave, that's when I had switched over and I started working in the clinic, and they were patients of that clinic. So I got to see her continuously through that. And I now get to see her every year at Florida Diabetes Camp, which is amazing. So I've gotten to watch this child from the very beginning, from diagnosis, in the hospital, luckily not learning with an orange, but in the hospital, and transition to becoming this full teenager, later, and how wonderful she's doing and seeing her thrive. And every year I get to see mom, and mom comes up and tells me all of the wonderful things that have happened that year and how great she's doing. But, the hug that I get from this child every year. And, I personally know I remember my diabetes educator, like that person that was there through the whole thing. So being able to watch her grow up and thrive is a blessing.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. So I know you mentioned that you have kids of your own. So have you gone through the process of testing them for any antibodies or anything like that?
Yeah. So actually, I have 3, like we had talked about, and I've had them all tested, and I get them all tested yearly. And my middle child has antibodies. So we watch her very closely. And of course, like as a parent, especially living with diabetes, like the minute any of them show any signs of anything, I'm poking fingers in the middle of the night and, just making sure they're good. But with her, we watch her very closely. So I actually do have her on a continuous glucose monitor, just because I travel sometimes for work. And like you said, I'm a little bit anxiety driven. So I'd rather know than not know, to catch that window, because there are so many things that you can do now, as Amanda talked about, to kind of, push off that diagnosis stage. So we watch her very closely. But I remember when we got the antibodies, when those lab results came in, and I saw that, and it's that fear, which I haven't experienced full on what you guys have, but of, oh my gosh, like this is life changing, right? Like just knowing that at some point, whether it's, you know, a few years from now or many, many years from now, that diagnosis is probable, it changes things. It really does. So there's many different spectrums of looking at diabetes, but being able to look at it from living with it, working with it, and potentially at some point in my life being a parent of a child with it is insane.
So then are you currently like doing things to like delay the onset of it? Because I know that there's a lot of research out there of things, but I don't even know if it's out to market yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of research. There's not anything for her yet at this moment. So they have different stages that they're in. And then once they fully hit stage 2, which means that they start to have hyperglycemia, like post meals, that's when like she'd be eligible for different things. So that's why I watch her really closely. Like you said, that anxiety driven, I feel you on that completely. So I watch it, and when she's there, yeah, definitely. But she's now just turned 9 years old, and just wearing the CGM, it's, as I'm sure you've seen with your own kids, it's amazing to hear her explain why she's wearing it. And now she can give you a whole spiel, I mean, on type 1 diabetes and what it is and whatever. So it's interesting to see how it transforms different people.
Yeah. And then how did you go about like telling her the news and explaining it to her?
When I told her, we talked about the different medications that were out there, you know, that are now, you know, like slowing the progression. But I do remember the very first time I went to go put a CGM on her, and she's like, you just don't understand. And I was like, what?
Like, girlfriend, I do.
So, Katie, as we wrap this up, what is the biggest takeaway that you could share with other people or advice when it comes to type 1 diabetes, being someone who obviously has it but also works in this field?
That's a good question. Lots of things come to mind. One of them, I would say, always be your biggest advocate. Like, know what's out there. Like, do your research. Be your advocate. And honestly, it's hard for me not to say it, but like, go to camp. Like, I know you've said that, like, you know, but camp is great. Like, go and find other people that also are living with what you live with. It's sometimes can be very lonely, and it doesn't have to be. So I feel like having that support system and getting to meet other kids that have diabetes, or for parents, like being able to meet other parents of kids with diabetes, like that in itself can be life-changing sometimes, because you don't feel like you're the only one that like stayed up all night looking at the Dexcom, waiting for the app to come back up, right? Like there's other people that did that with you. So kind of having that like support system and like reaching out to others.
Yeah, and I think we might have to take you up on convincing Parker to go, and if he doesn't like it, he can come up to Miss Katie, but we won't let him punch you.
But I couldn't agree more with you about it's all about community, and that's one thing that we really push here, why we love Touched by Type 1. And I always tell people, like, that's what was missing for me for the first 8 years of being a T1D dad, is not having that community, feeling alone, meeting other parents who know what to go through. So I love it. Katie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We'd love to have you back at some point. It was amazing to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I love what you guys are doing.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye, Palmr fam.
Bye.